You ever witness someone being treated so unfairly, so cruelly, that it burns itself into your memory and even decades later? That moment when you realize some people in power don't deserve an ounce of it. And karma doesn't always come on its own. Sometimes you have to deliver it personally. This story happened 30 years ago, but trust me, I remember every second like it was yesterday. I didn't plan revenge. I didn't even think I had it in me. But when I saw how he treated her, a complete stranger, something inside me snapped. And that one small act of silent justice still makes me smile to this day. It was the summer of hell, Miami Beach, July. If you've never been there that time of year, imagine walking straight into an oven wearing a wet blanket. The air was thick enough to chew, the kind that clings to your skin and makes every breath feel heavy. I had just graduated, degree fresh in hand, future still a giant question mark. My fiancé and I had traveled down for a national convention. The plan? To find my first real job, to start something meaningful. But life had other plans. The convention center was packed, thousands of graduates and professionals buzzing under flickering fluorescent lights. The smell of coffee, paper, and desperation filled the air. You could feel everyone's nerves crackling, like electricity bouncing off the walls. I shook hands, handed out resumes, smiled until my cheeks hurt. But deep down, I knew it wasn't clicking. No offers, no callbacks, just polite smiles and empty promises like, "We'll be in touch." Still, I tried to see the silver lining. I met one of my favorite authors, Gene Wolfe, who signed my book for free. I remember thinking, okay, maybe that's my win for the weekend. By the final day, I was drained. My fiancé and I packed our bags, ready to leave behind the noise, the heat, and the disappointment. The skies were dark that morning, thunder rumbling in the distance. When it rains in Miami, it doesn't drizzle. It attacks. Sheets of water slammed against the streets, bouncing off the pavement like tiny explosions. I remember laughing, saying, "Guess even the weather wants us gone." But I didn't know. That storm wasn't done causing chaos just yet. We were staying at a modest little hotel, the kind that looked fine in the brochure. But once you stepped inside, you realized it had more problems than charm. The air conditioner hummed weakly, pushing out air that was only slightly cooler than outside. The carpet smelled faintly of damp socks. I just wanted to check out, pay the bill, and catch our flight home. But as I walked up to the front desk, something caught my attention. The desk clerk, a man in his 40s, thinning hair, cheap tie, and an attitude that screamed, "I hate my job," was refilling a vending machine. Behind him stood a woman, maybe mid-30s. She looked exhausted, hair messy, eyes red, hands clutching a bag of clothes that dripped water onto the floor. Her voice trembled with anger and desperation. "Sir, I've been staying here all week," she said. "Last night, the roof started leaking. The rain poured into my closet. Half my clothes are ruined." The clerk didn't even turn around. "Ma'am, we can't control the weather," he muttered, sliding candy bars into the metal rack. "I'm not asking you to control the weather," she shot back. "I'm asking you to take responsibility. Your building has a hole in the roof," he sighed, loud, exaggerated. "You can fill out a damage form if you want, but management usually doesn't cover guest property." The way he said it, so casual, so dismissive, it made my blood boil. The woman's voice cracked. You could tell she wasn't the kind of person who liked to make a scene, but she was pushed to the edge. "Do you understand how much I've lost?" she asked, her eyes glistening. "These aren't just clothes. I had professional outfits, things I needed for this convention." The clerk finally turned around, smirking. "Look, ma'am, you're checking out today, right? Let's just call it bad luck. You'll survive." I felt my jaw clench. My fiancé glanced at me, eyes saying, "Don't get involved." But something in me, that old mix of empathy and fury, started to boil over. Finally, he turned away from her long enough to look at me. "Checking out?" he asked, voice flat. I nodded, sliding the room key across the counter. I couldn't help but glance at the vending machine next to him. The small glass box filled with overpriced snacks, locked tight. Or so I thought. As he processed our bill, the woman kept pleading, voice cracking between frustration and tears. "Please, I'm not asking for much. Just fairness." "Lady," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm, "this isn't a charity. You're lucky I don't charge you for the mess." That was it. My stomach turned. My hands balled into fists at my sides. The way he said, "lady," like she was less than him, it made me want to wipe that smug grin off his face. Finally, he looked at her, pretending to be professional. "Why don't we continue this discussion in the office?" he said. He gestured for her to follow him, and the two disappeared down a short hallway. That's when I noticed it, the vending machine. The door was wide open, and the keys were still hanging in the lock. I blinked, looked around. No one else was there. My fiancé whispered, "You okay?" I didn't answer. I just stared at those keys, metal glinting under the flickering fluorescent light like a silent invitation. That's when it hit me, a spark of poetic justice. My mind started racing. This guy doesn't care about anyone but himself. He thinks he's untouchable. He mocks someone already beaten down. But maybe, just maybe, he's not as untouchable as he thinks. I looked around once more. The lobby empty, rain hammering against the windows. My fiancé whispered again, "What are you thinking?" I just smiled. "Nothing," I said quietly. "Just poetic justice." As the taxi rolled away from that miserable little hotel, I couldn't shake her face from my mind. The woman at the counter. She looked defeated, like someone who'd fought all night for fairness, only to realize that fairness doesn't always live in this world, and that hotel clerk, the smug look on his face, the way he rolled his eyes like she was wasting his time. It burned me inside. That moment didn't feel small. It felt symbolic, like every time someone honest gets trampled by people who think power means they can treat others like garbage. I didn't plan revenge. It just happened. The vending machine's door hangs open. The jingling of keys are left dangling. The clerk's voice fades behind the door as he walks off with the woman. It was right there, hanging like temptation itself. The vending machine stood wide open, the keys still stuck in the lock. A small detail, an accident, or maybe fate offering me a choice. Part of me whispered, "Walk away. It's not your fight." But another voice, louder, sharper, said, "No, this is for everyone who's been disrespected, ignored, or cheated just because they couldn't fight back. It wasn't about stealing or hurting anyone. It was about balance, a moment of poetic justice in an unfair world." So I reached out and took the keys. We reached the airport, and the Florida sun was blazing like a punishment. I looked at those keys again, shiny, metal, innocent-looking, and yet I knew they held a storm. The vending machine was the clerk's side hustle. I'd seen him pocket cash from it before. He wasn't just rude, he was crooked. So I did what felt right. I tossed those keys into a trash bin near the terminal gate, and just like that, justice had been served. Quietly, subtly, without shouting or drama. Sometimes revenge doesn't have to be loud. Sometimes it just needs to exist. A few weeks later, I couldn't stop thinking about what might have happened next. Maybe the clerk panicked when he realized the keys were gone. Maybe the hotel owner had to call a locksmith, pay hundreds, and deal with the chaos. Maybe, for once, he got a taste of helplessness. That woman, she might have lost her clothes to the rain, but he lost his sense of control. When I think about it now, it wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about standing up, in the only way I could, for someone who couldn't fight back that day. We don't always get to see justice. But sometimes, if we're lucky, we get to create a little bit of it ourselves, and that, my friends, feels better than any apology ever could. Looking back, I realized something important. The world doesn't need heroes with capes. It just needs people who notice, people who care enough to do something, even when no one's watching. If you've ever wanted to see karma in action, or dreamed of the day when someone rude finally gets what's coming, then hit that like button and tell me in the comments, what's the most satisfying justice you've ever witnessed? Because sometimes a small act of revenge can make a big difference, not just for others, but for your soul. I'm justice served, and this was, they treated her like trash. But karma worked through me. You know what's strange about life? The moments that stick with you aren't always the big ones. They're the quiet seconds, the small, almost invisible choices that end up changing how you see the world. For me, that vending machine wasn't just a box of snacks. It was a symbol of every arrogant person who ever thought kindness was weakness. And every time good people stayed silent because they didn't want to make a scene. That day, I wasn't a hero. I was just tired of watching the wrong people win, tired of seeing the decent ones lose. I can still see her standing there, her suitcase open, clothes ruined, her voice trembling as she tried to reason with someone who refused to listen. And I can still see him, arms crossed, chewing gum, that fake smirk plastered on his face. He didn't just dismiss her complaint, he dismissed her humanity, and maybe that's why I acted without thinking. Because sometimes it's not about logic, it's about instinct, that deep, burning voice inside that says, enough is enough. When those keys hit the bottom of that trash bin, I didn't feel victorious. I didn't even smile. What I felt was balance, like the universe had been tilted slightly back into place, just for a moment. Maybe no one noticed. Maybe no one cared. But I did, and sometimes that's all that matters. A few weeks passed, and I went back to my routine. Job hunting, interviews, rejection letters. Life moved on, but that day in Miami stayed with me. It became a quiet lesson I carried forward. You see, revenge isn't always about destroying someone. It's about restoring what they tried to take from you. Your dignity, your peace, your balance. And that's exactly what I did. I can imagine the chaos. The clerk searching every drawer, every pocket, panicking as his side hustle came to a screeching halt. Maybe the hotel owner demanded answers. Maybe that smirk finally faded. No shouting, no violence. Just quiet, poetic karma. I've realized something powerful since then. You don't always need to make a scene to make an impact. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it's a small act of rebellion, a reminder that decency still fights back. Even when no one's watching, we all have those moments. The ones that test who we are when no one will ever know what we did. And I like to think, I passed that test. The truth is, I didn't do it for her. Not really. I did it for everyone who's ever been stepped on. For every quiet person who swallows their pride just to keep the peace. For every moment when decency feels like a losing game. Because that day, even if just for one vending machine key, the good guys finally got the last word. You know what's ironic? That small act probably cost them a few $100s. But what it gave me was priceless. Peace, closure, a quiet, personal victory, and no. It didn't fix the world. But it fixed something inside me. Years later, I told this story to a few friends over dinner. They laughed, called it petty justice. Maybe they're right. But here's what I told them. Petty justice is still justice. It's just smaller, sharper, and sometimes more satisfying. Sometimes life doesn't hand you fairness. You have to carve it out of chaos yourself. Maybe it's a word you finally say. Maybe it's a stand you finally take, or maybe it's just a pair of keys you quietly throw away, knowing that somewhere, somehow, the universe just took a breath of balance. If this story made you smile, not because it was big, but because it was right, then hit that like button, share it, and tell me in the comments, have you ever delivered your own version of quiet justice? Because sometimes the smallest acts echo the loudest in the heart. I'm justice served, and this was, they treated her like trash. But karma worked through me. It's funny how the smallest moments can stick with you for decades. You move cities, change jobs, fall in and out of love, yet one memory refuses to fade. That hotel lobby in Miami, the heavy air, the buzzing fluorescent lights, the smell of old carpet and cheap coffee. Even after 30 years, it's still there, frozen in my mind like a photograph that refuses to age. The air was thick enough to drink that day. Every breath felt like swallowing warm soup. My shirt clung to my back. My suitcase handle burned my palm, and the sound of the waves outside was swallowed by traffic and tourists. But I didn't care. I was young, freshly graduated, filled with hope, ambition, and a belief that the world rewarded good people. I thought hard work and decency were enough. Back then, I still believed in fairness. And then I met him. The hotel clerk. The kind of man who wears fake politeness like a mask, smiling only with his mouth, never with his eyes. He had that greasy charm that fools tourists but disgusts everyone else. When he wasn't pretending to help, he was counting money behind the counter, like every dollar was proof he was smarter than the people who earned it honestly. And beside him stood the woman who didn't deserve any of this. Her voice trembled, but not from weakness. It was that kind of shaking you get when you're trying your hardest not to cry. She showed him her clothes. Soaked, stained, ruined. A few dresses, a couple of blouses, even a jacket that must have cost her more than a week's pay. Rainwater had seeped through the ceiling of her room, dripping down overnight. She didn't ask for luxury. She didn't demand free nights or cash. She just wanted fairness, a partial refund for damage caused by their leaky roof, but he looked at her like she was wasting his time. He leaned back, sighed loudly, and said something I'll never forget, "Ma'am. If you didn't want your clothes wet, you should have checked the weather before coming here." That line hit me like a punch. Even my fiancé gasped quietly. That wasn't just disrespect. That was cruelty. The kind that hides behind company policies and fake smiles. The kind that makes you wish karma had a fast-forward button. He kept talking, dismissing her, mocking her, until finally he escorted her into the back office. And that's when I noticed it. The vending machine. Unlocked. Keys still dangling in the lock like a gift from fate. Time slowed down. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. It wasn't planned. It wasn't rational, but something deep inside whispered, "Now's your moment." I hesitated for half a second. Then my hand moved. The cold metal of the keys pressed into my palm. The sound of them jingling was deafening, as if the universe itself was watching me decide. I slipped them into my pocket. No words, no guilt, just silence. And when we got to the airport, I tossed them into a trash bin. Simple, quiet, irreversible. Sometimes I wonder if anyone noticed. If the hotel clerk went to restock his precious machine the next morning and found it wide open, snacks gone stale, money box exposed, keys missing forever, maybe he panicked. Maybe he blamed someone else. Maybe he spent the whole day sweating more than I did in that Miami heat. The thought always makes me smile. But the truth is, it wasn't really about the money. It wasn't even about the vending machine. It was about balance. You can't stop people from being cruel. You can't force them to care. But you can remind them that the world still has ways of pushing back. That day, I didn't just take a set of keys. I took back a little piece of humanity that he'd stolen from someone else. 30 years have passed. I've seen injustice in bigger, louder forms since then. Bosses, corporations, governments. But that small hotel, that one act, remains my quiet favorite, because it wasn't grand or dramatic. It was real. It was justice wrapped in silence. I sometimes imagine meeting that woman again, telling her the truth, telling her that even though her clothes were ruined, karma didn't forget her, that somewhere behind that front desk, the man who treated her like dirt got a small taste of his own medicine. Would she laugh? Would she cry? Would she believe me? I'll never know. But maybe she'd just smile, the same way I do now when I remember it. See, people like that clerk, they don't think kindness matters. They think cruelty is strength. They mistake apathy for professionalism. But life has a strange way of teaching lessons to those who think they're untouchable. And sometimes the lesson comes wrapped in something as small as a missing key. We live in a world that often rewards the loud, but underestimates the quiet ones, the thinkers, the observers, the ones who strike once and vanish. Revenge doesn't always need a spotlight. Sometimes it's best served unseen and unheard. So, if you ever find yourself in a moment where injustice burns in your chest, remember this: you don't have to destroy someone to set things right. Sometimes, all it takes is a small act that reminds the universe that you're paying attention, because even the smallest justice echoes forever. If this story gave you that quiet satisfaction, the kind that lingers long after the credits roll, then do me a favor. Hit that like button. Share it and tell your story in the comments below. I'm justice served, and this was They Treated Her Like Trash. But karma worked through me. Stay kind, stay aware, and never underestimate the power of quiet justice.